Assalamu alaikum, good afternoon, and Ramadan Kareem. Welcome to today's session of the Ramadan Pioneer Series, an initiative by Dubai Future Academy. Dubai Future Academy is the capacity building unit in Dubai Future Foundation and aims to become the knowledge hub for those creating the future. My name is Karen Gabriel. I've been working at Dubai Future Foundation for almost 3 years now, and I have the honor to be your host and moderator of today's session. So thank you so much for joining us. Today's session is focused on education and innovation. How are we coping? Before I introduce you to the panelist speakers, I would like to highlight that we are planning to create an interactive session, and we'll be taking questions from you, the audience, after the first 30 to 45 minutes. I'd encourage you to submit your questions at the bottom of the Q&A of the window, of the Zoom window. You'll see a Q&A function. And when you submit your question, it would be great if you can mention whether you're a teacher, a student, a parent, working government or private sector, just for us to have a bit of context. Now, I have two fantastic panelist speakers with me, Isobel Abulhoul and Maysa Jalbout. Welcome both. Isobel, I would like to invite you to briefly introduce yourself to our audience.
Hello, everyone. And wherever you are in the world today, it's a wonderful talk that Maysa and I are going to be having a conversation. And thanks to Dubai Future Academy for organizing these Ramadan Pioneer events. My name is Isobel. I'm the CEO and trustee of Emirates Literature Foundation, and I'm passionate about reading and education.
Fantastic.
I'm privileged to be with Maysa.
Thank you, Isobel. Maysa, over to you. You have been wearing quite a few hats in your career so far. If you could also please introduce yourself to our audience.
Hello, everyone, and welcome, and thank you very much for Dubai Future Academy. And Isobel, the privilege is all mine. You're an incredible lady. I'm so lucky to be online here with you today. And Ramadan Kareem to everyone, and I'm so delighted that we've been joined from people from around the world, including here in the UAE. I'm a non-resident fellow at the Center for Universal Education of the Brookings Institution. I've spent a long portion of my career working in education. It's my passion. I've worked in it in several capacities in the philanthropic sector, in government, with civil society. So I'm really happy to be sharing some of what I know with you and also to learn from all of you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Maysa, and welcome both. Now, before we start, I just wanted to mention that the field of education, of course, is a very broad topic, and Dubai Future Academy has hosted a really insightful conversation earlier today around higher education. So that's why we have decided that this conversation will focus on K to 12, so kindergarten to the 12th grade. Perfect. I guess we jump right into it. As we know, Covet has affected the education sector drastically. According to UNESCO, there are currently 1.2 billion children in 186 countries affected by school closure due to the pandemic. And one of the immediate changes we have seen in many countries, as well as in the UAE, was the shift to online learning or e-learning, where teaching is being conducted remotely using a digital platform. Now, Maysa, I know you are a strong proponent of online learning. How do you see the use of online learning right now in the current situation, especially with regards to students K to 12?
Before I answer that, one of the participants said they can't see me. I just want to make sure that everyone can see me now.
Can you see Maysa now?
Okay, I can see myself on screen. Okay, great.
We are getting yeses. That's perfect. Great. Thank you.
Yes, I am a proponent of online learning, but more than that, I'm a proponent of using every form of technology that we can access to enhance the quality of learning, to increase access to those who don't have the opportunity to join formal education, and to reach our very big goals. Technology can be an enabler. What we're seeing right now is that we have gone from using technology and online learning as a nice to have to it becoming an absolute lifesaver. According to UNESCO, we have 1.5 billion students studying online. Now, that's far from all the students that we need to have continue their education, but that is perhaps the largest number of students that have started learning online in our history. So it is both an exciting and a daunting time. And of course, it was all very super rushed. We were really forced into coming online because we had no alternative. And that hasn't necessarily been an ideal switch. We've had to do it because we've had no choice. But with that, and it was very rushed, and we had limited time to prepare and limited resources. So we were not able to build on the lessons learned that we have, on the research, on all the immense tools that we have, on the networks that we have, in order to create an ideal learning environment. In fact, what we've done is essentially, in a very quick fashion, try to, as much as possible, emulate what happens face-to-face in a shortcut approach and put it virtually, as opposed to redesign and use the opportunity to use technology in its fullest fashion. So we are in a situation for many people that is better than others. So of course, online learning has excluded many young people for not being able to have the right technology, or not being able to have the right schooling system that offers them those kinds of resources. But for those who have had access, it has not been ideal. We need to be able to now learn from the process that we've had in place. And we need to be able to look at this as a massive learning opportunity for us to be able to transition to the kind of learning that we've been talking about much before COVID-19. So it's really important that our conversation today, yes, is anchored in the challenge that we're facing currently, but it's about where we want to go. And we've been talking about the necessity of creating a massive shift in education for a very long time. And in fact, you could say that technology's impacted the way we live in almost every way, except necessarily in education. Education is one of the last sectors to be disrupted, particularly when you look at how health has been disrupted, or telecommunication, or whatnot. So this is a massive opportunity. I'm an optimist. I'm looking at it as an opportunity for us to learn, to change, to take learning to where we need to go.
Perfect, fantastic. Isobel, what has been your perception of online learning being used at the moment? I also know you have grandchildren who are being taught now remotely. So what has been your observation, and what is your take on online learning, how it's being used at the moment?
Well, I think first of all, I need to say that for schools and teachers and parents, this has been an unexpected ask of everyone. You know, schools and teachers have not had training in how to deliver online learning. They've just been forced into it. And I think that's an awful lot to ask of any human being. And for parents, again, it's not their normal role, perhaps, to be a teacher and to help, particularly primary school children, with what's being sent home or what they are picking up online. So sort of my experience is that two of my grandchildren are staying with us. One is 3 and one is 8, and they're both completely different in their approach to online learning. The 3-year-old has taken to it like a duck to water. He absolutely loves it. He's learnt the password for my iPad, and he also knows how to find Peppa Pig on on YouTube, and he's discovered all sorts of things. So he's like a sponge. He's integrating with and talking to his teacher on a daily basis. So he's found it his personality has adapted to it. My older grandson, who's 8, is quite introverted, and he's found it very, very difficult. And I think that's what we need to bear in mind with online learning, that learning happens for everyone in different ways. We have our senses, we absorb learning in different ways, we have different personalities, and that's what, you know, it is not one size fits all. So a skilled teacher will look at his or her classroom of students, and they know which ones need more support, which ones are shyer, and to put them in situations where they can come out of their shells and things. With online learning, it is very much about a tick, which is a ding if it's right, and a boom, which is a wrong. And, you know, there is no in between. There's no saying, well, you're nearly there. That was a nearly right answer. It's either right or wrong with a lot of online learning. So that's my personal experience. And what's been so interesting for me is that I'm pre-internet, pre-technology. I'm a dinosaur, okay? And coming into this, so I've always loved technology. I've loved what it can do for us, from automatic washing machines to Dyson Hoovers, to the internet, to mobile phones, to being able to learn a language online. I love it. But I have the before and after experience, and I also value hugely the advantages that face-to-face interaction as human beings makes for children when they're learning. You know, they pick up your body language, they pick up if you're humming when you're doing something and that you're in a good mood, all the things that a computer and online learning may not have, and we must never lose sight of that. So I don't think online learning is a replacement for the wonderful teachers. The only difference I would say is that for online learning, it is very much, you deliver the same to all children. Whereas with teachers, they're human beings, and you can have brilliant teachers and some teachers who may not be so brilliant, and that will make the child's experience different.
Absolutely, it's a very valid point. And I think what you just mentioned now about the importance of really personalizing the learning experience based on the child's needs and demands is very essential. And I want to go back to you, Maysa. You mentioned, well, of course, we all know there have been several conversations and cries with regards to disrupting the education industry. The private sector has complained that students who graduate don't have the right skills or the right mindsets. I mean, the system we are currently using has been more than 200 years old. Apart from, of course, changing the curricula, there hasn't been much changes that we have seen. Why do you think is that the case? Why are we so afraid to change the education system? I mean, all of the other sectors have been disrupted. Why, for us, did it take a pandemic to talk about, and not only talk about, but act upon changes?
Right. I think that change is difficult. I think the education system has been designed, it was invented in the industrial age. It's meant to be educating at mass. It's really built around standardization, compliance, testing. And when you take that structure away, things are very lopsided. And we forget why we're educating in the first place, right? Because what we're trying to do is to recreate what happens in the formal class setting online. And let me be clear, I'm a proponent of online learning, but I am not a proponent of replacing it. I think education is about teachers, good quality teachers. And I think that teachers are not resistant to change. I think teachers are caught in a situation where they have to comply and achieve the results that they are meant to be achieving, you know, to get children to pass tests, to go from grade to grade. They're limited in their ability to apply their creativity, their resources. They're teaching to a curriculum as opposed to teaching kids to develop the skills that are so essential to what a quality education is all about. To developing skills like problem solving, to have self-agency, to be able to have empathy, to, you know, one of the challenges with online learning, and I couldn't really stress this enough, is that we can't decide whether online learning works or not based on your experience today under the restrictions of COVID. What we have today is the most basic and most challenged form of online learning. Online learning, good quality online learning, as we know it, is built around planning, around goals, around personalization, the needs of students. It gives the teacher a lot more ability to be creative, to be able to, and gives them the tools. You know, if we had the right tools in the hands of teachers today, teachers would be able to use technology to assess what kids are learning in real time using technology, how they're learning, at what point of the day they're learning. Instead, what we have is a translation of the regular schedule that they're supposed to carry on during the day that's transitioned onto online. And it doesn't work. You know, for it to work actually is requiring a tremendous amount of pressure on the students themselves, on the teachers, on parents who are not prepared. In summary, the education system was not well prepared to take on online learning. So when we think about it and think about the future and how we want education to evolve, we cannot assess it simply based on today. We have to look at the realm of experience that there is, and there is a lot of innovative stuff that's happening. You know, one of the universities that I'm an advisor to, Arizona State University, has an amazing technology that they're able to track how students are learning and what they're learning, how much difficulty they're having, and what time of day they're able to learn more effectively, and what types of questions they respond to more positively. You know, teachers that are able to connect with larger communities around the world to pick up on the things that work from them, connecting students from around the world. And those types of things are happening, but not to the extent that we need to see in order to benefit all students. There's much more work to be done. So we need to be patient, but we also need to be hungry to learn and to change. This is our chance, this is our opportunity to leap forward, to get the education system to where it needs to be. We should be worried about a lot of things about online learning. One of them is equity. You know, online learning, the way it is structured now and due to lack of resources, excludes a lot of children. And so we need to think about how we do that. And we're starting to see some really creative initiatives. You know, television learning is back in some parts of the world. Radio learning. You know, I did my master's in distance education a long time ago, and I didn't have computers to study with then. We were looking at the impact of radio in delivering education to parts of rural Afghanistan and parts of rural Africa in conflict zones. So we need not think about it in very rigid ways. We really need to expand our thinking. We need to be able to connect with learners. And most of all, we need to empower teachers to be able to have agency to create as they see fit, to work with their students in creative ways, to, heaven forbid, not follow the curriculum exactly as it needs, so that they can engage the students and get the best out of them.
Absolutely. And I think the current situation has also shown, and hopefully in the future, will give more value to teachers. I think in the past we looked at education more, okay, which schools do we send our children to? But the teachers were kind of like secondary. It was more around the facility, the extracurricular activity. But as we had a conversation earlier, is now these things are stripped away, and the essence, the teachers, the classroom is being visible, which is quite interesting. Would you then also see, so you mentioned already, there needs to be more autonomy towards teachers. Do you then still see that we all go to a school building, or is it that, you know, there's one common facility which is being used maybe by different school institutions? Where do you see the relevance of schools moving forward?
Is that me?
Yeah, Isobel and Maysa, both of you. Yeah.
Well, I think that we're going through a global major disruption of education. And I think that this has so many benefits, particularly following what Maysa was saying, that when you have a major disruption, everyone is looking for ways to cope and manage. And there will be some extremely good solutions, technical online solutions coming out of this. So the best will rise to the surface, they'll bubble up, and that then will help. We will sort of swiftly move into being able to use online technology in much better ways to benefit the whole world. I saw online scholarship courses being offered by universities to disadvantaged students in different parts of the world. So there's so many things that are going to come out of this, but I think we will see technology take a huge leap forward, and that schools will benefit. They have to share that, you know, what works. It's got to be what works. How can you deliver online learning better? And, you know, what part of this is going to become a regular thing? So, you know, being able, think about pen friends when we used to write a letter years and years and years ago to someone living in France or Germany to improve our language. Nowadays, you could have shared classes from different places in the world because of technology, in the way that we are now talking in different places. There are participants from different parts of the world. This is an amazing thing. So we have to take all of the good and the learning and the innovation from this and apply it. And if we're just sitting and saying, well, we've always done it like this, we're not going anywhere.
So I see that both of you have to agree on the fact that now is our chance to really create a new education system. So before we were talking about it, but now it's time to do something. And we've talked about online learning so far, so the way we deliver knowledge and learning. I want to focus a bit more before I'm opening up questions from the audience is, what about the skills? Just last week, we had a very interesting Dubai Future Academy session on the skills of the future. And some of the points that I mentioned were around data analysis, AI-driven analysis, as well as some behavioral skills such as communication skills. But what are some of the skills that maybe have come to highlight right now, where it's become obvious that we have forgotten about them or put less emphasis on it? And Maysa, I'm going to direct a question to you. What do you think are some of the skills we maybe need to bring back to the education system?
Yeah, I mean, it's the skills, but it's also, if we step back, it's the values. Why are we educating children in the first place? What is it that we're looking to, for our children to come out of the education system? I mean, if this crisis has underscored anything, is how critical it is for us to be raising children who are empathetic, that know how to solve problems, that are going to be creative, that are going to be adaptable, but have self-agency. You know, I talk to a lot of educators and parents, and I have my own children. And what I see is that it's an education system that, despite all of the advances and despite everything we know, it's still an education system that relies on the teacher to teach in a way that encourages lack of self-agency on the part of children. So I wait for the teacher to tell me what to do next. You know, if I have a challenge, I go to the teacher or I go to the parent. I'm not necessarily, as a student, always intrinsically motivated to take the next step or empowered to be able to make choices about how I want to learn something or when I learn it. I have to follow a rigid system. So when that system is sort of discombobulated, then my whole education system, my whole education and learning process comes to a halt. And so I think that we need to move away from an education system that's so dependent on the teacher, that gives the teacher this rigid role. And we need to see a teacher become truly a facilitator, an enabler, one that creates and curates environments where children flourish. You know, we are so fortunate in this time and age that despite all of the challenges that the education system faces, that we still have an incredible amount of teachers who are amazing, who are willing to go through all of this and still get up every day and want to teach. And so we ought to give them the support, the resources, and the leeway to be able to to teach and to help their students flourish. It is definitely time for us to revisit the kinds of skills that we are trying to embed in our education system. Look, we're charged with this idea that we need to meet certain learning metrics, right? And that's critical. We all want our children to have literacy and numeracy, but we know that's not enough. We know that in the current way we're teaching our children, they are at risk of not necessarily being able to get the jobs that they need in the future. We've talked about the fact that the job market is changing so much that many of our existing jobs, all of us, will be overtaken by robots, by technology. The only things that are not going to be ever taken away from humanity, from our children, is creativity, is empathy, is being solution-oriented, being adaptable. So those kinds of things are going to be essential to education going forward. And for us now, in the current context that we're in, we have to be cognizant of the fact that this is extending a little more than we originally thought. You know, we thought a few weeks, then we thought a few months, and now it's starting to look like it could go on for longer, and perhaps, you know, education will be disrupted on a more regular basis than we'd like. So it's critical for us to be able to deliver the kind of education to children that's going to tap into their social and emotional well-being, and that helps them develop as individuals, as humans, as creative beings. So when you look at what's happening now with online learning, all of that has largely dropped off. There's very little cooperation and coordination. There's very little time being spent in curation of developing their artistic talent. You know, we talk about technology as being online, right? And we know that there are challenges with kids staring into a screen for hours. And we know that the experts are telling us that on average, we shouldn't have a child sitting in front of a screen for 3 hours. So our role of a teacher is not to be face-to-face with a child on screen for 3 hours. The role of a teacher is to facilitate, to curate, to design learning where the child could, long after they're sitting in front of a screen, could go away and develop projects. You know, could go back to the original technology of books and reading and the joy of that, to connect with people from around the world. So I think that there's an opportunity for us to develop those skill sets. And it isn't easy and it's going to be challenging, but it's doable, and I think teachers can do it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Maysa. You mentioned empathy and creativity and reading, and I know, Isobel, reading is your keyword. What other skills do you see that we need to incorporate again, or bring to, for the first time, bring to the education field moving forward?
Yeah, first of all, I think it's important to distinguish reading for pleasure. So the most important thing is that children read for pleasure. And if you can give a child that gift, that will remain with them for the rest of their lives. They look on books as something to enjoy. And those are the words that we need to associate with reading, because they can then have journeys all over the world, backwards and forwards in time through the pages of a book. But other skills that I think are really important. I'm going to say this because I think cookery is one of the most important skills for everyone, male, female, that we should be able to cook. If you think about cooking, I've got 5 children and 6 grandsons. They like nothing better than to cook when they were little and now as adults. So in cooking, you have measuring, you have reading, you have chemistry, you have all of those things that are incorporated into a simple act of cooking a meal together with your family. So that is something, I think it's a life skill. I would hate to think that any of my children were unable to enjoy cooking and sharing a meal that they've cooked with their families. Swimming, I think, is an essential life skill. It can save you. If you can swim, you might be in a situation, but it's also a wonderful sport, a wonderful thing to be able to do. Riding a bike. There is going to be a move away maybe from using cars so much, and cities are being developed that have bicycle tracks. I'm originally from Cambridge, which is a bicycle city, and I've got my old 32-year-old bike out recently, and I been biking around the very deserted roads in Jumeirah and enjoying it. So luckily I can ride a bike. So these are skills we mustn't forget: playing an instrument, singing together, and playing a sport once we can, teamwork within a sport. You know, if you're playing a team game, it's fabulous for learning. So I totally agree with Maysa. Empathy, you know, you need to find ways to be empathetic, because if you're empathetic, you will help other people. You will be able to understand other people. You'll be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. So the more that children are empathetic to others, through whichever methods you do. But sometimes we think about life skills as being very advanced, but don't forget the basic life skills that we should all have. You know, imagine if you had to stand up and say, actually, I don't know how to cook. How shameful is that?
A very valid point. And I think looking into what are the items that are being bought right now in supermarkets, I know that there are quite a few countries where baking goods are a high priority right now, and you even have to wait for getting it delivered. So I think there is now an increasing realization of these life skills and the importance of it. Now you're getting in some really interesting questions from the audience, and I just want to start taking a few of those. And the first one is from Shamma, and it says, do you feel now we will move towards creating a global learning community or global learning communities, crossing borders to learn from experts across the world, not just being limited to the offer we have, let's say, in the UAE, but also looking at K-12 students being able to benefit from a global access of teachers and schools? Who I would like to answer the question first.
I hope so. I think this is one of the most amazing advantages of technology, is that we can benefit. We can hear from, you know, world-class speakers. We can all share that, and it's not limited to 60 people crushing in or 500 people. It could be hundreds of thousands benefiting from online teaching with interactive question and answers like we're having now. I think it's absolutely the way forward. A brilliant question.
Maysa, what do you think? Is the future a global learning community instead of a local or regional one?
I definitely hope so. I mean, it would be a shame if we weren't able to take advantage of the resources that we have available to us and not take advantage of that. I think it would be our children's loss if, after all of this is said and done, that we go back to you know, local solutions only. But I want to caveat that with two things. I think we need to curate the right platforms, the right networks for teachers to be able to decipher what are quality tools and good quality education practices, and be able to engage in a way so that they can constantly recreate and adapt learning to their context. There are many things that are universal in learning, right? Science, math. You don't necessarily need to recreate them. And a good teacher puts her touch on it in a way that she knows she can get to a student. But the principles and the premise are there. But there's a lot of creativity around addressing solutions to local problems, a lot of creativity around understanding how somebody in the US or in Africa or in Asia has addressed a certain problem. I think about how the education community, and in particular universities around the world and students, have contributed to solutions for COVID. And I'm really heartened, right? You've got professors and students collaborating from all across the world, dropping their IPs to create new, PPEs, to create solutions, to cooperate around creating a vaccine. And that is exactly the image, the projection that we want for our students. But the education system needs to mirror that now. Cooperation is essential now.
So maybe in the future, we do not just only need trade agreements between countries, but also learning agreements to make sure that, we can access the global learning community. A few questions that came up right now were around homeschooling. We talked about in physical schooling in school buildings. We talked about virtual learning, but what about homeschooling? What is your take on homeschooling? And maybe starting with you, Isobel, do you think that this model moving forward would prevail and would create the best learning experience and outcome for children?
I think there's going to be a lot more homeschoolers going forward. I think parents, some parents can't wait to wave goodbye to their children back to school again in the nicest possible way. And there are some who actually feel it's that they're learning at a much faster pace at home, particularly the younger ones, where there are, say, maybe several children, 3 children maybe in a household. That homeschooling might be an answer for many people going forward. I had a relation who homeschooled her children for a couple of years and then put them back into schools. One of my daughters is very, very organized and is loving having the children at home. And I mean, my goodness, you know, what they get up to every day puts me to shame. I'm just thinking, where does she find the time? But I think it's maybe just because of the time and the age of her children that it appeals to her. But, you know, there is a cost involved if you're sending your children to private schools. And that might be a factor where people say, well, actually, with all the resources there are online, I'm going to give it a go. And I think there will be a much bigger homeschool movement. And also, I think it's very important that there is some regulation around that to make sure that that's not being chosen just for a financial benefit, that the children who are homeschooled are in some way their education is monitored.
Quality assurance, I think, is very important when it comes to homeschooling. And I personally was quite an opponent when it comes to homeschooling until, I guess, about 2 years ago, when I got to know a young lady, a 12-year-old girl, a bit closer, who was being homeschooled. And her experience was just very interesting and diverse, because one of the key concerns about homeschooling is always the lack of community and the lack of social interaction. But what her parents did is enroll her in multiple classes, from dancing to swimming and theater classes, where she got to know her peers as well and had this social aspect. Maysa, what is your take on homeschooling? And I think also with regards to the business model of schools in the future. I mean, right now in some countries, there's quite a high fee that parents have to pay for the education of their children. Do you think that the business model is at risk right now? Do schools have to reposition themselves?
I spend most of my time working on policy for public education. I'm a strong believer in public education. But of course, we know that private education is growing, and for many, this is the only opportunity to educate their children. And I think that sector is going to be challenged going forward. I think that with the opening in online learning and the opening of parents' eyes to the potential to engage in all kinds of forms of education, not just necessarily the choice between homeschooling or formal schooling. There's something in between, right? There's blended learning. There's an opportunity for their children to take classes with the best teachers in the world, wherever they may be, or to join courses, or to be part of experiences. So it is going to make it more challenging. It's going to be more incumbent on schools to step up and to recognize that they are now operating in a truly global education system, and to be able to distinguish themselves. And how they do that is by ensuring that they're able to provide highly individualized learning for the students, because that has to be one of the advantages of being able to go to a school, is that the school needs to know you as an individual, how you learn, what your preferences are, how to communicate with you. If you have a learning difficulty, how to address that, and to have a relationship with the parents. We're discovering that the relationship between the school and the parents is even more important than we ever imagined it to be. Imagine right now, if you didn't have parents who are supporting the education of children, what the outcome would be. And unfortunately, for too many children, that is the case, where their parents are not able to support them, either because they don't have a high enough education level or because they're working from outside the home. So we're extremely privileged to be able to do that. So it calls upon schools to rethink the fundamentals. They need to be able to provide individualized learning. They have to be able to empower teachers and support them. And they have to be able to create a learning environment that's compelling, that makes parents want to send their children there because they feel that it's not just about, you know, the lecture online with the teacher. It's about the full experience of going to school. The child's enriched as a result of that.
Fantastic, great. Thanks a lot for sharing. And I want to go now a bit to the other extremes. We talked about, of course, how thankfully we're very privileged in the UAE with regards to the education system and the access. And one question came up for you, Maysa, with regards to refugee and refugee children. How do we make sure that we don't leave them behind? How do we make sure that we use the right tools and the right format of education to be able to provide them a better future?
Whoever asked that question, thank you very much. I think that we have a long, long way to go when it comes to providing education to children that are most disadvantaged, and in particular, refugees. I've done quite a bit of work on that, and actually have a report that just came out on educating or solutions for educating children in refugee camps in the Greek islands, and I'd be happy to share that with participants. What's happening right now is that even before COVID, these children were not able to access education because they're excluded from the national system, because they're living in horrific conditions. So it's not possible for them to go to formal schools. And so they were relying on non-formal education, such as non-governmental organizations, UN agencies, and whatnot. But now with the COVID-19 crisis, all education has come to a halt. So what we're seeing is some creative outlets, you know, so some NGOs using mobile phones, because believe it or not, mobile phones are quite accessible, and refugees tend to have mobile phones in large numbers. They're also, you know, delivering packets to the refugee camps. So they're relying on whatever tools that they have to deliver education. But that's not enough. I think that what's really, really disheartening is that we should have been more prepared for this crisis. But hindsight's 2020, right? What we know is that there've always been excluded children, but we have not made enough investment to make sure that they're included. And now with the resources that we have, with the fact that we have this great opening, we should be able to deliver much more robust resources that allow children in refugee camps, in rural communities, girls who are excluded from schools in parts of the world, illiterate parents, to be able to access education, because the tools are available. But it's a question of policy, it's a question of funding, and it's a question of us creating the collaborations and the partnerships needed to deliver that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I just saw some comments. If it's possible to share the report afterwards, I think some of the attendees would be quite interested to receive it. I just see one question in front of my screen, which I think is very important. And I guess we'll only know the effects of the current situation on students' well-being and mental health in a couple of months or years from now. But what do you see the importance now of mental health? What do we need to do? And Isobel, I would like to start with you. When we now are ready to send children back to schools or kindergarten, how do we need to make sure the transition is smooth? And what should be the focus on mental health even moving forward, life after COVID? So
I think that we must never underestimate the impact that this unusual time has had on students throughout their school years. They are concerned about this virus. What is it going to, you know, harm them? Is it going to harm their members of their family? And we can't give them a sort of an answer straight away. So we do have to, there are some great books out there that have already been written about the COVID virus, which explains it in a simple, with diagram language for children to understand what it is. But it is a frightening time. They've never been asked to stay at home and not to be able to go out to the parks or the beach or wherever they live, having these restrictions on them. And then they start to get a bit nervous about when they do go out and here having to wear masks and things like that. It's so unusual. So mental health is definitely top of the list. Going back to school, they have now got very used to being at home. So when you're at home, discipline and behavior is completely different for many children to how they will behave and what is acceptable and unacceptable in school. They're going to have at least probably 6 months out of a school environment. So schools and teachers have to be ready to encompass that and to acknowledge it and you know, find ways of helping children get back into the routine of being one of a group, and that they have to fit in. They will stop learning how to fit in. They'll stop learning how to share and all of the other things that being part of a school community is. So I do worry about children's mental health, and you know, some of the questions that young children are asking about what's going to happen, and you know, how will it be, and how is it outside if they've not been outside, if they're living in a flat and they can't get out. Just imagine the effect on them. So I think there's an awful lot to be done when children do go back, and it has to start now. And I think having frank and honest conversations with children at home is really important, and not sort of brushing it under the carpet. They are hearing and seeing what's going on via technology and from, you know, adults' conversations. So we owe it to them to be honest in a reassuring way, and to let them understand that, you know, this is we're all in this together, and that, you know, they may have family in other parts of the world who are also undergoing that. That helps them to sort of, you know, be able to speak on Zoom with cousins and relations in other parts of the world. For many expatriate children, I think that's a great way of them understanding it's not just their own little enclosed world. But it is there is also research that's shown that having a prolonged time away from proper, you know, not proper schooling, that's the wrong thing, schooling as we knew it before this happened, that they will have lost a lot of their knowledge, you know, in maths and science and things like that. And they need time to catch up. So they need catch-up time as well. It's not that they haven't been learning online, but it's in a different way, and there may be gaps.
Fantastic. Thank you. One of the questions that was raised as well was around parents. We talked about the importance of change, that now it's the time for us to act upon change. And one question was stated, how do we prepare parents for the change? I know, Maysa, you are a parent. You have 2 children that are being schooled right now. What advice do you give to this participant? How do we prepare parents for change?
Oh, it's extremely challenging, particularly for parents who both work, right? And they're not able to drop their work and work full-time with their children on their learning. You mentioned also there are parents who don't have the ability to stay home. They're on the front line, like those who are working in the health sector or working in stores. And it's extremely challenging. So I think this becomes an important point for the collaboration between the school and the parents. There needs to be excellent communication. There needs to be much more clarity on what we're trying to achieve with children. There needs to be support and resources for parents. And I think also there needs to be an understanding that this is a challenging time. And I know a lot of parents are super stressed, stressed about what's happening, but also stressed about their children's education. And to your point earlier, Isobel, about the amount of stress that people are feeling, how that translates into children, that's super important, because we know that stress has a negative correlation with learning. And so if everyone is stressed and the environment is stressful and there are a lot of unanswered questions and children are missing their their teachers and their friends, and they're wondering about the future. And then there's this constant pressure about, you haven't finished your maths and you haven't done your homework, and, why don't you have more initiative, or, why aren't you following the rules? It can make children actually repel from education. And that would be absolutely the worst outcome for all of us. We already know that when children stop for summer break, there's an amount of learning loss that happens there. Experts are saying, there's potential for this period to have similar losses because of the anxiety that we're feeling and the stress that we're putting on ourselves and our children. So it's super important for mental health actually to be incorporated in education plans by schools, support tools to be provided. And we talked about the skills that children need. Well, they also need to learn how to manage their stress and to understand how they keep their mental health in check. It's perhaps the most important skill they could possibly gain right now.
And I really appreciate that it seems to be that we have now more honest and open conversation about mental health. I feel up until a couple of years ago, it was always a topic that nobody was willing to talk about because it was more associated with shame, than with importance. But I think we need to start talking about mental health the same way we start talking about physical health. And I love your suggestion of actually having it incorporated in a curricula, because I think it's another life skill and it's an essence of it. A question for you, Isobel, I think that's right up your alley, is with regards to reading, how can reading be taught effectively online? And maybe as well from your experience, how do you spark the joy of reading in children at an early stage?
My experience has been that you need to read to your baby, start when they're babies, every single day. It should be a special time that you share with your child. You put away everything and you make it clear that this is the most important thing. You have your baby on your knee, you have a little pile of books and you go through them, and you will soon find the kind of books that each child likes. They will be different for each child. And there is a wealth of physical books out there that children will absolutely love. They chew them, they scribble on them, they do all of those things, they pull them to bits. But they understand that one of the we do as human beings is tell stories. And that's where they start to learn it, that stories have a beginning and an end. And for children's stories, they're always happy endings. And so they get this lovely feeling. And certainly I grew up when I was a child with my parents reading to me every night. So it was bedtime, it was a way to wind down. And it was something that I looked forward to so much. And if you do that with your children, they do it with their children. I'm now seeing the third generation of children, part of my family, who all love books of different kinds, but they have piles of books and they look on books with joy. So it's not something that I think you do online. It is something you have to do. There are lovely libraries here and in many other places. You don't have to buy the books. You can borrow them. You can't borrow them at the moment, but once this is over, or if you have children's books at home, share them. A child's experience of books should not be when they go to school. It should have been long before that with their parents and carers, that they're sharing books in a warm, comforting environment where they're looking at the pictures, they're recognizing animals, they're increasing their vocabulary. All statistics have proven that if a child reads for pleasure on a regular basis, that child will outdo his or her peers. If everything else is equal, that child will go on to have better exam results, a better career, and will pass on that gift to the next generation. So if you give your child one gift, give them the gift of reading for pleasure. And if you look at reading, it encompasses so much of education. Without reading, where are you going to have doctors and scientists and pilots? Reading is one of the most essential building blocks of education. And that's the one that I'm most passionate about, because I see how easy it is to help a child fall in love with books. And the best place for that is in the home with parents and carers. and it should be a daily activity that you enjoy as well. I have children's books I love and children's books I don't love, and I used to hide them away because and my children somehow or other picked that up, and they would always insist on me reading those ones too.
Well, I can see it definitely. You speak from your heart, which is fantastic. And maybe a follow-up question that Linda just posed is, what is your take on virtual book clubs? Do you know any virtual book clubs that you could?
Yes. There are lots of virtual book clubs, and the Emirates Literature Foundation is just starting a virtual book club as well. I've got a pile here next to me of 6 books. That it's not for a virtual book club, but they're books that I love, and I get a lot of comfort. I'm very kinesthetic, so I love the feel of books. I love a Kindle. A Kindle is brilliant. I'm not against reading, but actually there's still something beautiful about looking at lovely books. And can you imagine a home without books? That's another thing. A book is books give a home character. And so please, any parents out there who are listening, read to your child. And it doesn't matter. I read to my children till long after they learned to read. We'd read a chapter a night, and we would lie on a different bed each night. So we'd warm that bed, and it would be a shared family activity. And then the next night we'd move to another child's bed. Because I've got 5 children, it was quite a lot of different ages. And some of the books I read, I couldn't stop reading. I had to actually continue after they'd gone to sleep to see what happened next. So it is a great activity. Never forget that human beings are great storytellers, and we need to feed that love within us.
Fantastic. Well, that's very inspiring, and I can already see the joy when you're speaking. Maybe Maysa, talking about joy, but something that is oftentimes seen as the antidote of joy is testing and grades. Do you see any changes in that field? I mean, especially now, right? We're experiencing a situation where exams are being conducted online. This was a no-go for some schools and universities until recently, because now there's no other choice. But do you see a shift in standardized tests? Do we get rid of them? Do we still keep them? Is there a different way of us for assessing the knowledge that has been obtained by the children?
I think that there's going to be folks who are going to be super eager to go back to education the way it was, and that includes testing. And there are those who are going to say, no way, we've learned too much. We experimented too much, that we can't go back to where we were. So if you see what just happened, for high schools and for universities, they found other ways to test children. They were able to be much more flexible with the way that they assess the knowledge of students and their experience. And of course, the schools and education systems that did better were the ones that had a good sense of the learning of the child or the youth along the way. So they were not reliant only on one final exam, right? They were able to understand what the child was learning all along, and they had a good sense of where they're at. They also gave some choice, right? So you had in some instances where high schools and universities said, your grade is this based on where you're at now. You can continue and do the exam, and it can shift based on that, or you can stick to where you're at. This kind of choice has been unheard of, but we're there, and we've experimented with it, and we need to learn from it. It's not perfect, far from it. There's much more to fix. But I think going forward, it's what we test, right? It's more what we're looking for, rather than going back to what Isobel said at the beginning, which is the, wrong, right answer. We're going to be looking for testing that's built around experiences, around being able to prove a theory of change, around projects, around being able to demonstrate creativity. Testing knowledge is super easy using technology, actually. But that's not what we're aiming for in education. What we're looking for is a child that is much more well-rounded, much more experienced, much more holistic, and being able to figure out how that works is going to be challenging, but very doable. And we're starting to see some really promising examples.
It seems like we're in a quite interesting time when it comes to, on the one hand side, we want education providers to test and experiment. On the other hand, you have, of course, parents, but also future employees that want to ensure a certain level and quality of education. But if you were speaking to policymakers in the UAE, but also globally, what do you think should be the points they should consider now moving forward to really take this COVID-19 pandemic not as a temporary change of the education system, but as a transition to a new education system? And I leave it open to anybody of you who would like to answer this question. Please, Maysa.
Isobel, did you want to?
Yes, I think that's a really, really difficult thing to say to policymakers. You know, where are they going after this? I think the policy actually starts at home. So I think by home, I mean schools. I think the schools should be driving policy on what works, and for policymakers to listen and not from on high say, do it this way, because who better to say what works and to help form policy than teachers and the school environment going forward. You know, I'm not 100% sure about whether testing is a bad thing. You know, I sort of failed my driving test 3 times and I had to keep going because I was obviously not safe on the roads, even though I rode a bike. So I think there is, and that's just there is some benefit. I agree with you, Maysa, what we test. It's what we test and what we don't test, how we recognize the potential in each student and how we reward that. Because you might be absolutely, you know, if it's a very narrow thing, every child has potential. How do we bring that to the fore and recognize that, rather than just saying, well, if you're good at reading, good at maths, good at science, you're an A student. But what about all the other students who have all these innate talents and skills that are unrecognized by some formal education society? So I can't really, I mean, policymakers will come up with policies, but do they work in practice? You know, there's a lot of theory, but maybe not so much practical evidence in following this that's going to help guide people forward after.
It's a very interesting take, the really evidence-based decisions, and I think the elevating the role of teachers and the say of teachers, because they're in the end on the ground, they know from a day-to-day experience. Maysa, do you agree with Isobel on what we would advise or wish from policymakers moving forward?
Yes, I do. I would just add that my message to policymakers is that seize this moment. Times of crisis are the times where the greatest amount of change is possible. This is a window of opportunity. And I think it's time to recognize the balance between policy and innovation. For too long, that tension has existed in a way that too rigid. I think that innovation happens in the classroom, in schools, in areas where you don't have a lot of resources. Our challenge now is, how do we take those small scale innovations and apply them at scale so that they are inclusive and able to reach students of different learning standards, of different challenges and different contexts. So policymakers have the chance to actually help create the environment, a nurturing and regulatory environment that supports innovation. That innovation that bubbles, from the ground up, as opposed to the other way around. The time for innovation coming from the top down is really ended, I think. If nothing else, COVID has really shown us. The governments that have been affected now are the ones that have been preparing for this moment for a long time. I mean, it's so interesting to see what's happening in China. They've long used technology. And so when this hit, this wasn't a huge crisis for them in the education system. I'm not necessarily advocating for a particular education or Chinese education. What I'm saying is we need to be prepared. The role of policy is to prepare for these situations in advance, but also to foster an environment where innovation can live. Going back to what we talked about earlier, which I think, regulatory environments should look at when we're assessing schools or when we're creating policy for a national government or even international cooperation. we should be looking for these things that we talked about today. Are we promoting the kind of education that ensures that every child can learn to their ability, that they're always progressing as opposed to us testing towards one standard, right? We know children in a classroom work to different levels. Every child should be able to work to their level and work towards a goal. We should be able to empower, support, and provide the necessary resources for teachers, as opposed to pressuring teachers to meet the regular standards that have been put on them, to actually elevate teachers and allow them to really flourish and move forward. And third, we should be thinking about learning as not just happening in schools, but actually learning happens in multiple nurturing environments. And we know that, students who have a nurturing environment at home, that are able to learn in community centers, are able to go to a library, that are able to participate in extracurricular activities, that are able to develop skills in multiple contexts, are the most successful students. So governments should, step back and look at that holistic learning environment and help it flourish.
Fantastic. Thank you, Maysa. Just before we invite His Excellency Khalfan Belhoul, the CEO of the BioFuture Foundation, onto the call, I would like to ask you both a personal question. What is the one thing when you think back of your favorite teacher? What was his or her feature that you still remember today that said, because of this person really has, or this teacher has influenced my life and my educational experience?
Mine was my English A-level teacher, who introduced me to the kind of books that I've never got over. So Hemingway, Graham Greene, the Russian great writers. And we had A-levels in those times. You had a year of no exams at all. And then you did your exams in the set. So we spent the first year doing nothing in terms of what we were going to be examined on. We were just given an absolute sort of roller coaster ride through literature. And I've never got over that. I have never got over that. And I would love to tell him that, he set me off on a course from which I've never recovered.
That's brilliant. It's very inspiring. Maysa, what about you? Who was your favorite teacher and why?
My favorite teacher was my principal, actually. He was an educator, and he did something that stayed with me and actually shaped my career. It was a private school, and one of the best in where I grew up. But he never turned away any child that had the ability to or needed to learn at that school, even if they couldn't pay. It was so inclusive. I grew up in a very sort of multi-faith, multicultural society, and he made sure that everyone fit in. We didn't know who's who. We all worked together as one. It was so inspiring to see that. And I really didn't understand the power of that until much later, and realized actually that was a unique experience. And I still talk to the graduates of that school, and we still talk so fondly about that principal and how he made sure that we all felt equal. And it was such an inclusive environment. And I hope, he's long past, but I hope you'd be proud of some of the work that I'm doing with my colleagues.
Fantastic, great. Thank you so much for sharing. I would like to now invite His Excellency Khalfan Belhoul, CEO of the BioFuture Foundation, to say a few words. Khalfan?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Karen. First of all, thank you, Karen. You did a great job moderating this session, so thanks a lot. And before I reach out to the panelists, I'd also like to thank everyone else who has attended today's session. And to start with the panelists, Maysa, I've learned a lot from you today. Thank you so much for all the wonderful insights and what you have mentioned. And I totally agree that we should seize the moment and get the best out of this challenging time. And there's a lot of pros that can come out of this. And I think the biggest pro out of this is how we can collaborate as humanity as a whole in the globe. I think there's so many learnings from home learning or working from home. But if we were to talk about the most impactful thing is, as you've mentioned, different decisions, different global leaders making different decisions. Unfortunately, they're fragmented, and hence the outcome is different. Had we looked at this challenge as humans and became more inclusive in decision making, I think the outcome would have been more positive. And I think this is one big moment that we should seize and learn from, inshallah, going forward. So thank you so much for the great insights. Isobel Abulhoul, who I love to call Mansour. Thank you so much. I cannot thank you enough, صراحة. You've been an inspiration now and since we were kids. Yani Mansour, for whoever doesn't know, is like a mother to me. And by the way, today is a very family conflicting positively way for me. Earlier I had a session with my cousin, and now Mansour is around here. The way you've spoken about books, you made me want to go and read the book right now. You can see the passion, and and I echo what Karen had said. I mean, you speak out of your heart when you talk about books and literature. I have this taking my daughter to sleep every day. She brings so many books to bed, and the amount of books she gets so tired, and she sleeps without even reading one of them with me. So, but at least we're building that habit in her. So, I mean, thank you so much, and we're also honored, by the way, to have His Excellency Mansour Abulhoul, who is the son of Mansour, Isobel Abulhoul. He's with us here. Mansour is the ambassador of the UAE in the UK, and we're honored to have him here with us as well. And he's like a dear brother to me. So thank you for your support, Your Excellency. And Mansour, lastly, I thank everyone. You've been always telling us that you're proud of us as we grow. We can only tell you that how proud we are from you now, and from how passionate you are in what you're doing. So keep doing what you're doing, and you have all our support. Maysa, thank you again for your insights. I cannot thank you enough. And thanks to everyone who has attended our session. And good to see you all. And stay safe, please.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your kind words, Khalfan. A big thank you as well from my end to you, Isobel and Maysa. It was an absolute pleasure getting to know you, your experience and your expertise. Thank you to all the participants, and of course to the team at Dubai Future Academy for organizing the Ramadan Pioneers series. There are a few more sessions coming up, so please check their website if you want to join them. And I guess just before we end, maybe today is a good day for us to, instead of watching Netflix, to enjoy reading a book. And maybe it's a good opportunity as well for us to reach out to our favorite teacher if he or she is still alive, and say a big thanks on how they've shaped our life. Stay safe, everyone, and have a good afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Buralda. Thank you, Maysa, and thank you, Karen. What a wonderful time we've had. And hello to all those amazing participants and your questions. You've uplifted us all today in what could be a dark time, but you've made it very happy. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Take care.